Watchmen, Chapter 4, Watchmaker. In Chapter 4, Dr. Manhattan has been accused of giving cancer to his colleagues, so he retreats to Mars. On Mars, Dr. Manhattan recalls the timeline of his creation, relationships, and impact before practicing his creation powers by making a glass castle. The key themes of Chapter 4 include, does free will exist? Is there a God? And how does God view humanity? Watch has multiple meanings, the first being the wrist timepiece referencing John's original career choice. The second is to guard. Chapter 4 tells the story of how the guard, Dr. Manhattan, was created, so it tells the story of the watchmaker in this way as well. The chapter title alludes to an Einstein quote, "I should have become a watchmaker." Albert Einstein was a famous scientist born in 1879. He is most famous for E equals mc squared, but Moore's reason for his inclusion likely falls on Einstein's signature on the Einstein-Szilard letter that endorsed the research of nuclear weapons. This specific Einstein quote regards the deterministic effects of quantum mechanics. Einstein was scared of the uncertainty brought by quantum mechanics, but this contrasts with the deterministic views of Dr. Manhattan's non-linear view of time. In Chapter 4, since one of the key themes is time, there are many historical figures and historical events. Fidel Castro led the communist Cuban Revolution in the 1950s. He was known for his Man of the People motto, including many socialist programs for the poor. He is mentioned in a degrading manner due to the American mindset of communism being bad. He is contrasted as a Russian puppet with Elvis Presley as an American icon. During the 1950s, Elvis started his career as a rock and film icon. Known as the King of Rock and Roll, his personality often didn't mesh with the older generations of America. This clash is why the scientists referred to Elvis degradingly, rather than as simply good because he is not communist. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was the 35th President of the United States from 1961 to 1963. JFK is most famous for his involvement in the Cuban Missile Crisis and kickstarting the space race. JFK was assassinated in 1963. He acts as a centering point for Dr. Manhattan's timeline. Richard Nixon was the 37th President of the United States from 1969 to 1974. He is most famous for being the president during the Vietnam War and being the only president to resign while in office. After Fidel Castro seized control of the Cuban government, Cuba became a communist country. This led to rising tensions in the U.S. as a communist country close to home scared American politicians. Their fears were confirmed in 1962 when Russian nuclear missiles were discovered housed in Cuba. JFK managed to resolve the Cuban Missile Crisis by agreeing to pull U.S. missiles out of Turkey. The Vietnam War was a proxy war between the USSR and the U.S. from 1955 to 1975. Neither country wanted the other's political ideology to advance further into the world, so they sent weapons, strategists, and eventually soldiers into other countries to fight. The United States military faced heavy public backlash after drafting young men into seemingly endless war, and were eventually forced to withdraw. In 1979, Iranian students who supported the Iranian Revolution took control of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. The 52 U.S. diplomats were held hostage for 444 days before negotiations were finally completed. In the 1940s, the United States military funded the research and development of atomic bombs. The U.S. eventually used the research of the Manhattan Project to end World War II by dropping atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Both the name Dr. Manhattan and the newspaper of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima allude to the Manhattan Project. After Dr. Manhattan is created, the history of Watchmen splits from the real world. In the Watchmen's Vietnam, Nixon asked Dr. Manhattan to intervene before the public opinion swayed in favor of pulling out of Vietnam. Dr. Manhattan obliged, and South Vietnam won the war within 2 months. This war curbed Russian adventurism, but also showcased the U.S.'s dependence on Dr. Manhattan for protection. This alternate history also has an Iranian hostage crisis, but the government employed Edward Blake manages to swiftly end the crisis and return the U.S. diplomats to America. With Dr. Manhattan's creation, scientists are only limited by their imaginations. He allows for the creation of electric cars and airships, as well as advancements in eugenics and teleportation. Chapter 4 starts and ends with Dr. Manhattan dropping the photo of himself and Janie in the sand. After and during flashbacks, Dr. Manhattan will think about dropping the photo on the ground. The central motif of Chapter 4, dropping the photo, questions the flow of time. Dr. Manhattan does not view time linearly, and perceives all actions he takes to have already been taken by himself in the future. This non-linear view of time questions free will. If every action we take has already been taken, do we really decide our actions? Dr. Manhattan creates watches, sandcastles, and himself in Chapter 4. These creations are used to question whether there is a God, and attempt to answer it using the teleological argument. This argument states that the universe has order and structure. This order and structure implies a design, and design implies a designer. Therefore, there must be a designer to the universe, that being God. Watch cogs are repeatedly shown next to the stars in order to contrast the two. In the teleological argument, the universe is often compared to a watch because a watch is intricately designed by a watchmaker and could not be replicated by chance. Moore uses these two symbols to support the teleological argument, as both imply a creator. In Chapter 4, clocks are either set for 8 minutes to midnight or for 10:40. 10:40 is the time that Janie's watch broke, and is still the time while John is being disintegrated. Future clocks being set to 10:40 represents the unmoving nature of time for Dr. Manhattan. 8 minutes to midnight represents where the Doomsday Clock is situated. The Doomsday Clock was started in 1947 as a way to gauge how close humanity is to killing itself from scientific advancements. Throughout Watchmen, the Doomsday Clock counts down from 12, and recurring 11:52 clocks show the events in Chapter 4 that leads towards New York's sacrifice. In 1963, Dr. Manhattan gets hydrogen earrings as a gift for Janie. When Janie leaves in 1966, she throws the earrings down before storming out. Laurie is later seen with the earrings, but she also leaves them behind as she leaves. These earrings represent Laurie and Janie's attachments to John, so they throw away their attachment to John when they leave. Superman exists as a comic book character in the Watchmen universe. Superman is the embodiment of the American dream, and is invincible. The news making Dr. Manhattan comparable to Superman is a way to scare the USSR and inspire American citizens. Dr. Manhattan's pal, Wally Weaver, is an allusion to the Superman comics' Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen. Moore contrasts these two characters because while both are all-powerful, Superman cares for humans while Dr. Manhattan views humans as no more important than ants. As time progresses, Dr. Manhattan wears less of his costume until he starts to wear nothing. As his costume begins to disappear, his connection to humanity also disappears. On Mars, Dr. Manhattan wears nothing, showing his complete disconnect from humanity at that time. The bestiary is where the Geel-Flat scientists do their best work. A bestiary is a journal of animals, often mythical. This bestiary bar is where they write down their findings of mythical science like quarks and intrinsic fields. The bulletin board even has puns alluding to quarks, at play amidst the strangeness and charm. Quarks are paired, with one of the pairs being a strange charm pair. When Dr. Manhattan is coerced into crime fighting, he goes to Moloch's bar, Dante's. Dante Alighieri was an Italian poet during the 13th and 14th centuries. His most famous work is The Divine Comedy, in which he details his trips through hell, purgatory, and heaven. Moore likely alludes to Dante in order to paint the criminal den as hell. At Edward Blake's funeral, Dr. Manhattan can sense the presence of Moloch, but cannot recognize who he is. Moloch is the name of the Canaanite god of child sacrifice through fire and war. Dr. Manhattan can't see the god of sacrifice at the funeral, just like how he can't see the sacrifice of New York in the future. In the plot of Chapter 4, the Fat Man is the character who steps on Janie's watch, breaking it. Fat Man was also the name of the bomb dropped on Nagasaki in World War II. When Dr. Manhattan says, "Am I to blame or the Fat Man?" the Fat Man can either be the character stepping on the watch, or the atomic bomb forcing John to go into the profession. Nodus Gordiae is Latin for Gordian knot, the knot that prophesies the untier would become king. Alexander the Great cut the knot to untie it. The meteor shower falling over the Nodus Gordiae Mountains foreshadows that this is the time for Ozymandias' plan to come to fruition. Stars are connected to watches, and therefore time, while Ozymandias is connected to Alexander the Great and the mountain.